You don't live in a democracy. You live in a financial system, one that decides who wins wars, who builds empires, and who stays poor. It doesn't wear a crown and doesn't need an army. It rules through contracts, credit, and quiet compliance. Most people never notice it because it doesn't need to hide. The greatest trick money ever pulled was convincing the world it was neutral. If you love the real stories behind money and power, hit like and subscribe before we go on. Now, let's dive in. We were taught money is a tool, a measure of value. But what if that's the myth? What if money is a system of control, designed not to measure value, but to extract it? The story isn't about villains in boardrooms. It's about centuries of quiet engineering by merchants, kings, and bankers who learned to turn promises into power. For most of history, money was real: gold, silver, grain. Then, a new idea emerged. What if money didn't need to exist, as long as people believed it did? The first glimpse came in Song Dynasty China, where the government issued paper notes backed by nothing but imperial decree. It worked until too many were printed, and trust collapsed with the currency. Centuries later, Italian merchants rediscovered the power of promises, inventing letters of credit pledges redeemable elsewhere, safer, faster, invisible to bandits, and more profitable, because paper multiplies in ways gold never could. That was the birth of the modern illusion, the separation of money from matter, and no one mastered it like the Medici. In 15th century Florence, their bank financed kings, popes, and wars. They pioneered double-entry bookkeeping, an invention that sounds boring until you realize it changed civilization. For the first time, money could be created with ink instead of metal. Every debt became wealth. The Medici didn't just record value, they manufactured it. By the 1600s, the Dutch Republic turned trade into empire with the Joint Stock Company. Its East India Company sold shares, pooled the money, and built an empire of ships, spice, and silver. Profit was no longer tied to work, but to ownership. The company grew richer than kingdoms, and the line between state and corporation blurred. England copied the model its own. East India Company had armies, taxes, and a currency. It didn't just trade goods, it governed people. The real turning point came in 1694, with the Bank of England. The government, drowning in war debt, turned to private financiers. In return, those bankers got the right to issue notes, paper money backed by the state's debt itself. A brilliant paradox. The more the government owed, the more money it could print. Debt wasn't a weakness anymore. It was the engine of empire. War, once limited by resources, became limitless. From that moment, money and power became inseparable. Kings no longer ruled bankers. Bankers ruled kings. The 19th century saw the rise of global banking dynasties. The Rothschilds, the Morgans, the Barings. They brokered peace, funded revolutions, and financed both sides of wars. Every crisis reinforced their power. When governments went broke, bankers rescued them in exchange for control. Nations still existed, but the real empire was financial. The flags were symbolic. The credit was real. The 20th century tightened the grip. In 1913, the United States created the Federal Reserve, officially a public institution to stabilize the economy. In practice, it gave private banks the authority to issue public money. The government no longer created currency. It borrowed it, with interest. Printing became policy. Democracy became debt management. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the dollar became the anchor of global trade, pegged to gold, while every other currency pegged to the dollar. On paper, stability. In practice, the world became dependent on American policy. Whoever controlled the dollar controlled the system. When Nixon ended the gold standard in 1971, that dependency became absolute. The dollar was no longer a claim on anything, just a belief. Fiat money was born. Currency backed not by metal, but by faith. Money had become pure abstraction, and in that abstraction, power became invisible. For the first time, the system no longer needed resources to grow. It just needed credit. Governments borrowed to spend. Corporations borrowed to expand. Consumers borrowed to live. The world kept spinning, not on wealth, but on debt. That's the system trap. A structure so vast it doesn't need to conspire against anyone, it just needs everyone to participate. Every paycheck, every mortgage, every credit card balance feeds it. You can only feel it in the cost of living, in the price of time, in the quiet anxiety that no matter how hard you work, you're never really ahead. You can't see the rulers because they don't look like rulers. They wear suits, not crowns. They meet in boardrooms, not palaces. They rule through numbers, not laws. The government spends, the central bank prints, the market inflates, and the bill goes to everyone else through inflation. That's the quiet tax on the unaware. We think inflation is random. It isn't. It's design, how the system resets without reforming. When it prints too much, it erases debt without ever saying the word default. It punishes savers, rewards debtors, and keeps the wheels spinning. The 2008 crisis made this clear. When the system collapsed under its own weight, governments didn't punish the gamblers. They rescued them. Trillions were created overnight, not to save people who lost homes, but to save the institutions that built the bubble. They called it quantitative easing. In reality, it was money conjured from nothing to preserve everything. People accepted it because they had to. The system doesn't survive by violence. It survives by dependence. You can opt out of politics. You can't opt out of money. The next evolution isn't coming. It's already here. Central bank digital currencies are being tested worldwide. They promise efficiency and convenience, but they also erase the last illusion of privacy. Every transaction recorded, every purchase traceable, every account programmable, money that can be frozen, redirected, or deleted with a few keystrokes. The endpoint of a 700-year journey. The same mechanism, perfected. Freedom becomes conditional, not by decree, but by design. And here's the twist most people miss. There's no single villain. There's just momentum. The system doesn't need conspirators. It runs on incentives so powerful that good people follow them without question. Politicians chase growth because voters demand it. Banks create credit because markets reward it. Consumers take loans because survival requires it. The trap isn't external, it's internal. But history offers hope because no system of illusion lasts forever. Rome debased its currency until soldiers demanded payment in goods. The French monarchy printed assignats until bread riots consumed Paris. The British pound ruled the world until the cost of empire exceeded the means to finance it. Every time, it ends the same way. Belief breaks. When that happens, the survivors aren't the ones with the most money, but the ones who understand what money actually is. Not wealth, but trust. Not power, but agreement. The moment that agreement fractures, the system resets, and those who saw it coming rebuild from the ruins. We may already be close. Debt levels are historic. Inflation is structural. Nations borrow to pay interest. The illusion holds only because we've never known anything else. So how do you escape the system trap? You can't destroy it. You outgrow it. You learn its logic. You stop confusing digits with value. You build things the system can't print: knowledge, skills, relationships, real assets, independent thought. The more of those you own, the less control it has, because the one currency it can't inflate is awareness. Money rules the world because we let it, but every system that rules eventually serves. And when this one breaks, as they all do, the people who understand the past won't be victims of the collapse. They'll be authors of what comes next. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this gave you a new perspective on how money and power really work, hit like and subscribe, because history always has the answers. You just have to know where to look.